Christmas Eve in Vermont had a certain kind of stillness. The snow had fallen steadily since early morning, blanketing the entire town in white silence. The roads were slick, the sky was slate gray, and the pines outside the window of my childhood home stood heavy with ice. Inside, warmth buzzed through the grand living room of the house I never truly felt was mine. Golden lights glowed across a tall Christmas tree, the fireplace crackled softly, and the dining table shimmered with polished silver and crystal glasses. I sat at the far end of the table, half hidden behind a large floral centerpiece. My plate was barely touched. My fork clinked against the porcelain as I pushed a piece of roast chicken back and forth. I wasn't really hungry. I was just trying not to feel out of place. The laughter around me echoed too loudly, like it belonged in someone else's story. "Lena, did you bring your pie?" My mother's voice, my stepmother called out from the head of the table. I nodded and gestured to the kitchen. "It's in the fridge," I said quietly. No one followed up. Their attention had already shifted back to Sierra, my stepsister, who was telling another dramatic story about college in New York about her friend's boyfriend, or an internship, or something equally exciting and distant from my life. I looked around the table. My father sat next to my stepmother, sipping wine with the same proud smile he always reserved for Sierra. The guests were mostly old friends of theirs, a few new neighbors, and Sierra's college roommate who kept giving me quick, puzzled glances, like she couldn't figure out who I was or what I was doing here. Truth was, I wasn't sure either. The invitation had come 2 days before through a text message. No call, no warmth, just a short line from my stepmother Christmas dinner. Be here by 6. I almost didn't come. But it was Christmas, and I guess part of me still wanted to feel like I had a family. The sound of a car pulling into the driveway pulled my attention to the window. It was late for more guests. My stepmother stood up quickly and peeked through the curtains. "Oh my God," she whispered. "He actually came." Who, my father asked. "Your grandfather," she said, barely moving her lips. The doorbell rang. My heart skipped a beat. Grandpa Edward hadn't visited Vermont in years. He had retired to Florida a decade ago and rarely traveled. I hadn't seen him in person since my high school graduation. The room quieted as my father walked over to the door. When he opened it, a burst of cold air entered, and behind it, there he was, tall, upright, dressed in a dark wool coat and scarf, silver-haired eyes sharp and clear as ever. He walked in slowly, his gaze scanning the room. "Grandpa," I said, standing. His face lit up when he saw me. "Lena, there you are," he said warmly, stepping forward and wrapping me in a hug. His coat smelled like citrus and cedarwood. "I've been waiting to see you." Everyone else stood awkwardly, unsure of what to say. "I didn't know you were coming," I said softly. "Well," he said, pulling back and smiling, "I like surprises, and I've been meaning to check in on the house." I blinked. "The house?" "Yes," he said, turning toward the table. "The house I gave you, 2 years ago." Time stopped. I stared at him, unsure I'd heard him correctly. "The house you gave me—" The room went silent. My father froze his wine glass halfway to his lips. My stepmother dropped her napkin. Sierra's eyes darted between all of us. Grandpa looked confused, then serious. "Lena," he said slowly, "I wired money to your parents 2 years ago to buy you a home here in Vermont. I told them it was for you. A fresh start." "You didn't know," my voice caught in my throat. "No," I said. "I never received anything, no house, no mention of it." Grandpa turned toward my parents. Their faces were drained of color. "What is this?" he asked, his voice no longer warm. My father opened his mouth, but no words came. Then my stepmother stepped forward. "There must be some confusion," she said quickly. "It was meant for the family. We thought it would be better used if I said it was for Lena." Grandpa interrupted, his tone sharp, his face stern now. "Not the family, Lena." And just like that, all hell broke loose. I was 5 years old when my world first split in two. Before that, it had been just me and my mother. I don't remember much from those early years, just flickers. Her soft voice reading stories before bed. Her hands folding my clothes with care. The way she'd kiss the top of my head like it was her favorite place in the world. But even those memories are like looking at an old photograph through fogged glass. They feel far away, distant, blurred by time and grief. She died suddenly, an aneurysm, they told me. One day she was there walking me to preschool, laughing at something I said. The next she was gone. At 5, I couldn't understand how something could be so permanent. I kept expecting her to walk back through the door. I'd wake up from naps convinced I heard her keys jingling or her voice calling me from the kitchen. But she never came back. For a while, I lived with my grandmother, my mom's mother. Grandma Rose was firm but kind. She kept the house quiet, neat, structured. She taught me how to knit. She told me stories about when my mom was young, how stubborn she'd been, how creative, how she used to rearrange the furniture in her bedroom every week just because she liked a fresh start. I loved hearing those stories. It was the only way I could keep my mom alive. But then Grandma Rose got sick. Cancer. She held on as long as she could, but the treatments drained her physically, emotionally, financially. She passed away when I was 9. That's when I moved in with them. My mother had no siblings. My father was never in the picture. So the court awarded custody to my closest living relatives, my mother's cousin Cheryl, and her husband Mark. They were older, well-established. Mark worked in insurance. Cheryl stayed home to raise their daughter Sierra, who was 1 year younger than me. On paper, it made sense. They had a house, a stable income, a complete family. But from the very beginning, I knew I didn't belong. They didn't say it outright, not at first, but it was in the way they set up the guest room as my space while Sierra's room was filled with toys and colors and light. It was in the way Cheryl sighed when I asked if I could take ballet classes like Sierra. Or the way Mark raised an eyebrow when I asked for seconds at dinner. "You've had enough, haven't you?" he'd say with a tight smile. Sierra was their pride. She had a closet full of clothes, a bookshelf that stretched from wall to wall, and her own iPad by the time she was 10. I shared a secondhand phone with a cracked screen and got clothes from garage sales. Still, I didn't complain. I didn't want to cause trouble. I was already the burden, even if no one ever said the word aloud. Cheryl had a way of talking to me that made my skin crawl, not cruel exactly, but careful, cold, like I was a stranger who'd overstayed my welcome. "You should be grateful, Lena," she'd say when I asked to attend a school field trip. "We're doing the best we can." When I turned 12, I started helping around the house more. Laundry, dishes, vacuuming. "It's only fair," Cheryl said. "You live here too." I didn't argue. I thought maybe if I worked harder, they'd see me. Maybe if I became helpful enough, kind enough, useful enough, they'd come to love me. That never happened. By the time I reached high school, it was clear that any dreams I had would be secondary to Sierra's. She was enrolled in art classes, taken to museums, flown to summer programs in New York. I begged to take a design class my sophomore year. Interior design had always fascinated me, but Cheryl said it was too expensive and not practical. "You're better off learning real skills," she said, "something stable." So I got a part-time job bussing tables at a local diner. I saved every tip I earned, hoping to take online courses one day. At night, I'd sketch out room layouts in an old notebook, copying designs I saw in magazines left in the break room. At home, Sierra barely acknowledged me. She floated through the house like a princess, always dressed in new clothes, always on the phone, always surrounded by praise. She wasn't cruel, just indifferent. I was like a shadow she stepped over. Mark barely spoke to me unless he was criticizing something. "You should learn to smile more, Lena. You always look so tired." Cheryl, meanwhile, made sure I never forgot where I stood. "This isn't your house, sweetheart," she said once when I left a cup on the counter. "You're lucky to be here." That line stayed with me. Not your house? Lucky to be here. So I kept my head down. I worked, I stayed out of the way. I watched as Sierra graduated high school with a party and gifts and a trip abroad, while I received a single card that read, "Good luck with whatever comes next." I didn't ask for anything else. I knew better. By the time I was 22, Sierra had gone off to college in New York City to study photography. Cheryl and Mark bought a new house in Vermont, a spacious 3-bedroom place with tall windows, a wide porch, and a brand new kitchen with granite counters. They invited me to help them move in. I carried boxes, unpacked dishes, mopped floors. When I asked if I could have one of the guest rooms to stay for a few weeks while I looked for a new apartment, Cheryl smiled politely and said, "Actually, we need both for Sierra and for when family visits. But the basement's open if you don't mind." So I stayed in the basement. No window. A bare mattress on a concrete floor. A single lamp. I stayed quiet. Cooked my own meals. Left early in the morning and came back late. I had a full-time job at a flower shop by then. I tried not to take up space. Still, every now and then, I'd catch Cheryl glancing at me like I was something she couldn't quite throw out. That was the life I lived. Not quite homeless. Not quite part of the family. Just a girl in the shadows pretending not to care. Until Christmas Eve. Until Grandpa came. And suddenly the shadows I'd lived in weren't dark enough to hide the truth anymore. By the time I turned 18, I knew exactly where I stood in that house. I wasn't a daughter. I wasn't even a guest. I was help. I woke up at 5:30 every morning to prepare breakfast not for me, but for Cheryl, Mark, and Sierra when she was home from college. I made coffee the way Mark liked it, strong and black, and I folded the laundry in neat piles outside each bedroom door. No one ever asked me to do those things. But no one stopped me either. That was the rhythm I learned to live by, offering too much, expecting nothing. I applied to a small community college nearby, with the quiet hope that maybe, just maybe, I could start studying interior design. I wanted to create beauty, spaces that felt like home. Maybe it was a reaction to all the places that never felt like mine. The day I got the acceptance letter, I came home smiling for the first time in weeks. I placed the envelope carefully on the counter, waiting for Cheryl to finish her call. When she finally glanced at it, she sighed. "Lena, we talked about this. We can't support you through school, not financially, not logistically. Sierra's tuition is already a stretch." I nodded slowly. "I can work full-time, nights and weekends. I've already saved Sweetheart," she interrupted, placing a hand on my shoulder like she was doing me a favor. "You have to be realistic. You need stability, not dreams. You're not like Sierra. She's always been the creative one." I stood there feeling my stomach drop. Not like Sierra. Of course not, I was never like her. I didn't have a bedroom filled with framed photography or a camera gifted for Christmas or parents who talked about my potential. All I had was an acceptance letter I couldn't use and a job I couldn't afford to lose. So I let the dream go. I kept working at the flower shop, taking extra shifts, skipping breaks, doing deliveries when no one else would. I became dependable, quiet, invisible. The kind of employee who gets good performance reviews, but is never asked what she really wants. At night, I'd return to the basement room that barely counted as living space. The mattress was stiff and the air always damp. My belongings fit into 2 boxes, a few thrifted clothes, some books, my sketch pad. I didn't have much, but I took care of what I had, and I told myself it was enough. Because if I let myself think about everything I had missed college independence love, I'd break. Sometimes Sierra came home from school and treated me like background noise. She'd toss her coat on the counter I just wiped down, or ask me to iron a shirt before her dinner with friends. One night as I was folding napkins for a family gathering, she sat across from me with a glass of wine and asked almost casually, "Do you ever wish you had done something else with your life?" I looked up from the stack confused. "I mean," she went on, "you've been here forever. Don't you want, I don't know, more?" I wanted to laugh or cry. "Yes," I said simply. "I do." She blinked, surprised by my honesty. But before she could respond, Cheryl entered the room, waving a guest list and calling for help with the seating chart. That was how it always went. I spoke. No one listened. Once when I asked Mark if I could look into online classes, cheap ones, nothing fancy. He shook his head. "I don't want you distracted from your responsibilities here," he said. What responsibilities? I wanted to scream. The laundry, the dishes, the errands. I wasn't a child. I wasn't disabled. I could balance work and study like anyone else. But I didn't say any of that. I nodded. I returned to folding towels, to answering texts like, "Can you pick up groceries?" or "Sierra needs a ride from the train." My life wasn't mine. I didn't have keys to the house. I didn't have mail with my name on it. I didn't even have a birthday party when I turned 23. But I didn't complain, because that's what they'd taught me, to be good, to be small, to be grateful, even when nothing was ever given to me. Once, Grandpa Edward called and asked how I was doing. I hesitated, then said, "I'm managing." He paused. "That's not the same as living, Lena." I didn't respond. I didn't know how. Back then, I still believed that one day things might shift. That maybe if I kept being good, they'd finally accept me. Maybe Cheryl would hug me. Maybe Mark would say he was proud. Maybe Sierra would call me sister, not just Lena. I didn't know that everything I was missing had already been taken from me, on purpose, and that the people who took it, the ones I called family, had built their comfort on a lie that would finally come crashing down on Christmas Eve. The first time I saw the new house, it looked like something from a catalog. 2 stories tall, white panel siding, dark shutters, and a wide front porch lined with hanging ferns. The lawn was freshly cut, the driveway newly paved, and everything smelled like clean wood and fresh paint. There was even a red mailbox with gold numbers on the front. It felt perfect. Too perfect. Cheryl beamed as she walked me through the front door. "Well, what do you think?" she asked, sweeping her hand toward the open concept living room. It was beautiful. The hardwood floors gleamed. The kitchen island was marble. There were crown moldings and polished doorknobs, and a fireplace with stacked stone up to the ceiling. Above the mantel already hung a photo of the 3 of them, Cheryl, Mark, and Sierra, wrapped in scarves and smiling in front of a Christmas tree. There was no picture of me. Still, I smiled and said, "It's nice." They moved into the house in early fall, and I was invited to help with the packing, the driving, the unpacking, the cleaning. I carried boxes up and down the stairs, installed curtain rods, arranged kitchenware in drawers. When it was all over, I asked tentatively if I could stay for a while, just until I found a new place. Cheryl smiled tightly. "Well," she said, "the guest rooms are spoken for. One for Sierra when she comes home. The other is going to be Mark's new home office. But the basement is finished now. It has heat and a door. You could set up down there if you need to. If I need to." I nodded and thanked her. I had nowhere else to go. The basement wasn't terrible. It had a small rug, a futon, a utility sink, and a plug-in space heater. But it was cold in the mornings and damp at night. There were no windows, no natural light, just 3 overhead bulbs that buzzed when turned on. I called it the box. I tried to decorate it a little. I hung a string of warm white lights around the wall and taped a small print of a forest scene above the bed. But the cement floor and the exposed pipes reminded me daily that I was not truly welcome. I was a tenant with no rent, an extra, a leftover. They never said that, but they didn't have to. Once Mark walked down and noticed the lights I'd strung up, he frowned. "Looks a bit dorm roomish." "Don't you think?" I said nothing. He left without waiting for a reply. Despite everything, I tried to settle in. I worked 6 days a week at the flower shop. I bought my own groceries, cooked my own meals, and kept the basement spotless. I didn't eat with them unless invited. I didn't touch the thermostat. I didn't park in the driveway unless it was empty. Sierra came home for Thanksgiving that year, and suddenly the whole house buzzed with life. Decorations went up, music played through Bluetooth speakers. Cheryl baked pies from scratch. I spent most of the weekend in the basement. At one point, Cheryl asked me to take a family photo. She placed me behind the camera and said, "Get our good angles, Lena." I took the picture, all 3 of them in matching outfits, standing beside the fireplace, in front of a giant garland. When I looked at the image, it struck me how perfect it seemed, how curated. Anyone who saw it would think they were the happiest, closest family in the world. I wondered if Grandpa had received a copy. When Sierra left again for school, the house quieted. Cheryl began preparing for Christmas early presents, menus, invitations. She ordered custom ornaments with their initials, 3 of them. CMS. There wasn't one for me. One evening while cleaning the living room, I saw a stack of papers on the entryway table, property documents. Curious, I flipped through them. My heart stopped. The deed to the house was dated 2 years ago, long before Cheryl had ever told me they were moving, long before I'd even known they were looking at real estate. The house had been bought outright, no mortgage, paid in full. I stared at the purchase amount. $300,000. It didn't make sense. Where had the money come from? I remembered Mark saying once that things were tight, that they were sacrificing to put Sierra through school. So how could they afford this house? I asked Cheryl about it the next morning casually, as if making conversation. "Didn't you say you bought the house after selling your old one?" She hesitated for half a second. Yes, she said quickly. Well, partially. We had some help. From Grandpa, I asked. She smiled stiffly. Something like that. I wanted to ask more, but something in her eyes told me to stop. Like I had walked too close to a locked door. I dropped it. But the question sat in my stomach like a rock. Why would Grandpa give them money for a house? Why hadn't I heard anything about it? And why did she look so nervous when I asked? I told myself it didn't matter. I had my own life, my own little space in the basement, my own job. I didn't need to know everything, but the question stayed with me quiet and sharp until Christmas Eve, until Grandpa knocked on the door and asked about the house he gave me. And in that moment, the walls around the truth began to crack. The rest of the room stayed frozen for a full 10 seconds after Grandpa spoke. I could feel it like someone had unplugged the world. No sound, no movement, just the weight of his question settling like snow in every corner of the house. The house I gave you. I stood near the dining table blinking, not even sure I had heard him correctly. Grandpa, I said slowly, you said you gave me this house. He nodded once firm. Yes, 2 years ago. I sent the money to your parents with clear instructions. I told them it was for you. My heart beat so hard I could feel it in my teeth. I never heard anything about that, I whispered. Cheryl stepped forward quickly, her voice light too light. Dad, it's not what you think. We were going to tell her eventually. But she was in transition. She didn't have a job yet. She didn't know how to manage a house. We thought it was better to hold on to it until, what Grandpa asked, voice sharp. Until she was worthy enough. No, of course not. Mark cut in, his voice flat and professional, like he was in a meeting. It was all for the good of the family. We just didn't think Lena was ready. He looked at me then, as if to justify it. You were struggling. You had no savings. It would have been too much responsibility. I stared at them, unable to speak. Not because I didn't have words, but because I didn't know which ones could hold all the betrayal I felt. Sierra was quiet now. She had sunk halfway into her chair, her eyes darting between us like she was watching a fire creep closer, but couldn't move. Grandpa stepped forward, slow but deliberate. I sent a cashier's check, he said, his voice low and steady, but rising in intensity. $300,000. I gave it to Mark along with the deed transfer paperwork and instructions to list Lena as the owner. I told you it was her fresh start. Her home. Mark's jaw tensed. I handled the purchase, he said stiffly. But the paperwork got complicated. The bank. The title office. Grandpa raised a hand. No, he said. Stop, you're lying. Cheryl opened her mouth. We were going to give it to her when Grandpa snapped. After another year in the basement. After more family photos with her standing off to the side like she doesn't belong. His voice was rising now. I looked at those pictures. I thought she was happy. I thought she lived here. You sent me smiling photos, emails, updates, talking about your blended family and how well she was doing. You lied to me. Mark stepped forward, his voice dropping, trying to stay calm. We didn't think it was necessary to involve lawyers. Lena was already staying with us. It made sense to keep the house in our name until you could keep it permanently. Grandpa cut in voice like thunder. Until you thought I wouldn't notice. He turned to me, then his eyes softening. Lena, I'm sorry. I didn't know. I truly thought. I shook my head, my throat tight. I thought they bought the house with their own money. You thought they were taking care of you. I nodded, but they weren't. They never were. Suddenly it all clicked, the way Cheryl deflected questions, the strange timing of the house purchase, the way I was never invited into real decisions, only tasks. I wasn't family. I was leverage, a name left off a deed. A shadow kept quiet. Grandpa turned back to Mark and Cheryl. You not only lied to me, you stole from your own family, from my granddaughter. Mark raised his hands. Edward, let's be rational. I have been rational. Too rational. I gave you the benefit of the doubt for years, but this is theft. His face was flushed now, his voice shaking not with age but with fury. "You had no right!" Silence fell again, thick and suffocating. Then Sierra spoke, her voice small, tired. "Is it true?" she asked, looking at Cheryl. "Mom," Cheryl didn't answer. That was answer enough. Sierra stood slowly backing away from the table. "I thought we were a good family," she said, "but we took something that wasn't ours." She looked at me, eyes glossy. I didn't know. I believed her. But that didn't change what had happened. Grandpa took a deep breath, steadying himself. "Lena," he said, "I'll call my lawyer first thing in the morning. We're going to fix this. We're going to put the house back in your name." "As it should have been." I nodded slowly. "And you," he said, turning to Cheryl and Mark. "Don't expect another dime. You've taken enough." Mark opened his mouth, but Cheryl pulled him back. "Don't," she said. "Not tonight." Grandpa walked toward me then and put a hand on my shoulder. "I'm taking you to Florida with me tomorrow," he said. "Just for a while. A break. A place to breathe." I didn't know what to say. I only knew that the air around me felt different now. Lighter. Like something heavy had been peeled away. I looked once more at Cheryl and Mark. They couldn't meet my eyes. For the first time in my life, they had nothing to say. I didn't sleep that night, not because I was anxious or afraid, but because my mind wouldn't stop racing. Every corner of the house looked different now, like I had been staring at a painted wall, only to realize it was a curtain hiding something rotten behind it. In the silence of the basement, I sat on the edge of the futon, the overhead bulb casting a dim yellow light on the cracked cement. My suitcase stood beside me half-packed. Just a few clothes, my sketchbook, the only photo I had of my mom, and the hand-me-down coat I wore every winter. Upstairs, the floor creaked once or twice, but no one came down. I don't think they knew what to say anymore. By morning, the house was quiet. Mark had already left for a walk before Grandpa came. Cheryl didn't even look up from the sink when I entered the kitchen. She was scrubbing the same plate over and over again, her hands raw. "I didn't know it would end like this," she said softly. "You mean with the truth?" I replied. She winced. "You were always so polite," she murmured. "Never asked for much. I thought you didn't want anything." I shook my head. "I didn't want money. I just wanted to belong." She didn't say anything. I walked away. When Grandpa arrived to pick me up, he stood tall and calm in the entryway, dressed in his usual wool coat. His driver, James, waited outside in a sleek black SUV. I carried my suitcase up the stairs myself. Nobody offered to help. Cheryl finally turned around and said, "Where are you going, Florida?" I said simply, "Just for a while." And the house, I looked around the living room, the gleaming hardwood, the photos of Sierra on the wall, the perfectly arranged furniture. "I don't want it anymore," I said. "I don't need to live inside a lie." Grandpa's eyes flicked toward me with quiet pride. "I'm going to sell it," I added, "and use the money for school." Her face twisted for a second. Maybe it was shock or shame. I'll never know. I didn't stay to ask. We left. In the car, Grandpa didn't speak right away. He waited until we were on the highway, the snow-covered trees whipping past the windows like ghosts. "I should have followed up," he said eventually. "I shouldn't have trusted them." "It's not your fault," I said. "They lied to everyone." He nodded, his gaze fixed on the road ahead. "I'm proud of you, Lena. You didn't scream. You didn't try to humiliate anyone. You stood up. With dignity." I smiled faintly. "Maybe I got that from you." That night in Florida, I slept in a real bed for the first time in years. A bed with clean white sheets, a soft mattress, and a window that looked out over a quiet backyard garden filled with palms and jasmine. The room smelled like lavender and fresh air. It didn't feel like a hotel. It felt like peace. The next morning, Grandpa brought me to a small local college. He had already arranged a meeting with the admissions office. "Interior design," I told them. "That's what I want to study." They asked for transcripts for paperwork. Grandpa handled most of it. I filled out the forms. They waived my application fee. "You're a little older than our typical student," the admissions counselor said kindly. "But that's not a problem." "I've waited long enough," I replied. Classes started in 3 weeks. We spent the next few days shopping for supplies, binders, pencils, a laptop. Grandpa insisted on getting me everything I needed. "No shortcuts," he said. "Not this time." I tried to protest. He silenced me with a look. "Let me do for you what I should have done years ago," he said. At night, we sat on the porch drinking tea. He told me stories about my mom, how she used to rearrange his office furniture as a kid, how she dreamed of opening a bookstore, how she once painted her entire bedroom yellow and made her own curtains from old bed sheets. "She had your fire," he said, "and your gentleness." It was the first time in a long time I felt close to her. During one of those nights, I asked Grandpa the question that had been gnawing at me since the Christmas dinner. "Why did you send the money to them and not to me directly?" He sighed, running a hand through his silver hair. "I thought I was helping," he said. "I thought it would feel more natural coming from them, like it was a gift from your own parents. I didn't want you to feel different, like a charity case. But I always felt different," I said. "They made sure of that." He nodded slowly. And now I looked around the quiet garden, the stars above, the clean air, the silence that didn't hurt. Now I feel free. I used part of the house sale money to pay for the full year of school. The rest I saved. I found a small apartment near campus, nothing fancy, but it was mine. I painted the walls soft blue. I bought a small potted plant. I made the space mine. For the first time, I had my name on a lease. For the first time, I had mail with my name on it. I even framed a small print of my mom's favorite poem and placed it near my desk. It read, "There is nothing stronger than a soft heart that still chooses to love even after everything." I started school in the spring semester. Most of the students were younger, louder, bolder. I felt out of place at first. But my professor, a woman in her 50s with a kind face, took me aside after class one day. "You see details others miss," she said. "That's your strength." That evening, I cried in my car for a long time. Not because I was sad, but because someone had finally seen me. Not as a guest, not as a burden, as someone with value, as Lena. Florida didn't just feel like a new chapter. It felt like I had stepped into a different book altogether. There were no familiar corners to avoid, no cautious footsteps upstairs, no reminders of what I didn't have. My mornings began with sunlight through wide windows, not damp shadows in a basement. My nights ended with quiet, not creaking floors, or the click of doors being locked behind me. The small apartment near campus wasn't anything extravagant. It was a one-bedroom unit with creaky floors, mismatched tiles in the kitchen, and a persistent humming from the refrigerator. But I loved it, because it was mine. The first thing I did after moving in was paint the living room walls a soft sage green. I strung fairy lights across the window and placed a thrifted lamp in the corner just to make the space feel warmer. For once, I wasn't making something nice for someone else. I was creating my own place of comfort. College was an adjustment. I was older than most of my classmates, and I didn't come from the same kind of background. While others talked about vacations and student loans and living in dorms, I spent my lunch breaks reviewing online tutorials and sketching design plans at a quiet corner table in the library. But it didn't take long for me to find my rhythm. I learned about spatial flow light theory, sustainable materials. I built models by hand, sometimes staying up past midnight, cutting foam boards and printing layouts. My professors noticed. One of them told me I had an eye for emotion in space, which became the first compliment I pinned to my corkboard at home. I got a part-time job at a local design studio, mostly answering phones and organizing swatches, but they let me observe meetings and client sessions. Eventually, they asked for my input on a layout, then a paint palette, then a full-room mock-up. Each time they said yes, it stitched something back together inside me. My life slowly filled with color, literally and figuratively. I spent weekends visiting furniture outlets and antique stores, not to buy anything, but to learn, to see how pieces told stories, how people created homes out of houses. Back in Vermont, I had never understood the difference. Now I did. A house could be full of light and still feel like a prison. A home was something else entirely. I sent Grandpa photos, often my apartment, my school projects, the studio where I worked. He always replied within minutes, usually with a string of emojis and one of his classic phrases, "Keep going, kid. You've already climbed the hard part." Sometimes he visited, sometimes I went to his place for dinner. He always had a new recipe to try or a new story about my mother. He told me how she used to rearrange furniture every few weeks just to feel something fresh. I laughed every time because I realized I did the same thing. "You are your mother's daughter," he said once, handing me a glass of lemonade. "But stronger. You've lived through more." I started journaling again. Not about the past, at least not in the same way. I wrote about my future, about the kind of woman I wanted to become, about creating spaces that made people feel safe and seen. I even started planning a personal project, an affordable design service for women starting over. Single mothers, divorcees, women leaving shelters. I wanted to help them reclaim beauty in their surroundings, even with small budgets. I want them to feel like they matter, I told Grandpa. Even if they're rebuilding, you're not just building homes, he said. You're building dignity. That sentence stayed with me. About 4 months into the semester, I got an email from Sierra, just a few lines. She said she was sorry, that she hadn't known, that she was ashamed of how blind she'd been. I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I replied. "I believe you," I wrote, "but I need space. Maybe someday." She never responded after that. I didn't blame her. I didn't think about Cheryl or Mark much. Grandpa had told me they moved into a rental apartment near the edge of town. They kept to themselves. Mark lost his job shortly after the house was transferred back to my name, and then sold. Cheryl started offering sewing lessons, though she hadn't touched a machine in years. I didn't wish them harm, but I didn't wish them well either. They had taught me too much about silence, about invisibility, about surviving without affection. That lesson wasn't something I needed anymore. One day, I received a call from my boss at the design studio. "There's a client," she said. "Single mother. 3 kids. Just escaped a bad situation. They're living in a temporary housing unit, and she wants to make it feel like a home. Think you can take the lead on this one?" I said yes. And I poured my whole heart into it. We turned a cold blank space into something warm and tender. We found secondhand furniture, handmade artwork, and cheerful curtains the kids picked out themselves. When the woman walked in, she covered her mouth and cried. "I didn't know I could have something like this," she said. I just smiled and said, "You can, and you deserve it." Later that night, I walked back to my apartment, tired but full. I sat by the window with a cup of tea and looked out at the street below, people walking, laughing, living. I thought about the girl I had been not so long ago, living in a basement, eating dinner alone, waiting to be chosen. And I thought about the woman I was becoming, choosing herself, claiming space, living out loud. It was nearly a year later, on a rainy afternoon in early December, when the past tried to knock again. I had just finished a long day at the studio helping install fixtures in a small family-run bakery downtown. My hands were covered in paint, my hair tied up in a messy bun, and my boots were caked with dust. I dropped my bag on the floor of my apartment and sank into the couch ready for silence. Then my phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, but the area code, Vermont. I stared at it for a long second before answering. "Hello." A voice I hadn't heard in a long time cracked through the line. "Lena," she said. "Cheryl." For a moment I didn't speak. She did. "I'm sorry to bother you. I know I have no right to. But I didn't know who else to call." I remained silent. "We lost the apartment," she continued, her voice hollow. "Mark hasn't found work. Sierra moved in with friends. I've tried everything. But it's been hard." I swallowed. "Why are you telling me this?" "I don't know," she said. "Maybe I'm hoping you still have some kindness left." That sentence hung in the air, heavy and ironic. Kindness. I remembered being 13, sick with a fever, and still having to clean the kitchen because Sierra needs a calm space. I remembered turning 18 and getting a single card with no gift. I remembered every dinner I wasn't invited to sit at, every photo I wasn't asked to be in. "You taught me to survive without it," I said quietly. She was silent. "I'm not calling to beg," she said eventually. "Just if there's anything you could spare. A connection. A referral. Something." I looked around my apartment, modest but warm. The tea kettle whistled softly from the kitchen. "I rebuilt my life," I said. "Not because of you, but in spite of you. I worked for every inch of this." "I know," she whispered. "And I have no anger left," I said. But I also have no space for the people who broke me. She didn't argue. Maybe she knew she couldn't. I hope you find what you're looking for, I said, and ended the call. I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I just stood there for a moment, breathing in the quiet. That was closure. Not revenge, not punishment, just a closed door. I sat down at my desk and opened the folder labeled Next Chapter. Inside was the plan for my community design project offering pro bono space planning and interior services for women starting over. I had 5 names on the list already. I picked up my pen and started sketching. New walls, new light, new chances. Somewhere in the background, a new life was waiting to begin for someone who thought she didn't deserve beauty. And I would be the one to hand her the key.